I always thought I knew what I was getting into when I married Emily. Her mom, Eileen, was a piece of work, but she'd been mostly a background character in our lives until recently. You could say I underestimated how much of a shadow she cast over everything. It started with small things. Eileen would make passive-aggressive comments about our house or the way we were raising our kids. "Oh, you're doing it like that?" she'd say with a smirk, as if there was a secret rule book we weren't following. Emily would brush it off, saying, "That's just how Mom is." But it was more than just that. Eileen had this way of weaving herself into our decisions. Every holiday, she'd insist her traditions were more important. "It's a family thing," she'd state, expecting us to drop our plans. I could see how it annoyed Emily, but she never put her foot down. Then one day, as I was loading the dishwasher, Eileen dropped by unannounced. "This place is a mess," she commented, eyes scanning the room like a hawk. I shrugged it off, but inside, I felt the frustration bubbling. "Is that the best way to do it?" she asked, eyeing my dishwasher loading skills. I chuckled, trying to keep it light, but the seeds of doubt were already there. Was I doing it wrong? Would Emily say something? Later that evening, Emily and I got into a minor spat about the dishes. "You know, Mom's right," she said, echoing Eileen's earlier words. That's when it hit me. Emily was mirroring her mother's behavior without realizing it. Was this how it was going to be? I started noticing more. Emily would call her mom for advice about everything, from what curtains to buy to how to discipline the kids. "Mom says this," "Mom thinks that," became constant refrains in our conversations. I didn't want to be the guy who came between his wife and her mother, but it was driving me nuts. One night, I overheard them on the phone. "You have to stand your ground, Emily," Eileen said, her voice firm and insistent. It was like she was grooming my wife to be her little clone, and I could feel my heart sink. When I finally brought it up with Emily, she got defensive. "You're overreacting," she said, her voice tinged with irritation. "Mom just wants to help." But I couldn't shake the feeling that Eileen's idea of help meant controlling every aspect of our lives. So, here I was, caught between the woman I loved and the formidable force that was her mother. It was like Eileen was always there, a ghostly presence influencing everything. I realized if I didn't do something, I'd end up living in Eileen's world, not mine. What would you do? Would you risk rocking the boat, or let it drift further into her tide? I knew I had to figure this out before it was too late. I never thought I'd find myself in such a bind, especially when it came to my marriage. My name's David, I'm 34, and living in London was supposed to be the dream. You know, the big city life, bustling streets, and endless opportunities. But here I was, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, and wondering how things got so complicated between Emily and me. We met during our university days, and everything clicked. Our tastes, our goals, even our fears seemed to align perfectly. But over the years, as we climbed the proverbial career ladder, I started feeling a shift. It was subtle at first, like when you wake up and realize the weather changed overnight. I noticed it more when I landed my current job, one that demanded more hours and, crucially, more travel. Emily used to joke about me becoming a workaholic, but now those jokes were edged with something sharper. "David, are you sure you're not using work as an escape?" she asked one night. I wanted to laugh it off, but a part of me couldn't. Was I? The idea gnawed at me more than I cared to admit. Every trip felt like a temporary reprieve from the tension that had settled at home. Emily had her own career, equally demanding, if not more. She was a force of nature, and I admired her for it. But lately, it seemed our ambitions were no longer running alongside each other. Instead, they were colliding. Conversations turned into negotiations, and our shared laughter felt like a distant memory. I missed the ease we once had, the ability to talk about anything without worrying about the hidden meanings or the future implications. The tipping point came when she suggested we see a counselor. "You know, just to help us communicate better," she said. I agreed, thinking it might help. But sitting in that office, under the scrutiny of a neutral third party, I felt exposed. Vulnerable. It was as if someone had peeled back layers I didn't even know I had. The counselor asked questions that got under my skin, questions that forced me to confront things I'd pushed aside. "Do you think you're losing yourself in your marriage?" the counselor asked. I hesitated. Did I? It wasn't just about the time or the compromises anymore. It felt deeper, like I was slowly being absorbed into a version of life I couldn't recognize as my own. There was a part of me that longed for the freedom of my 20s, when decisions were simpler and the stakes weren't so high. I loved Emily, I really did. But love was beginning to feel like a chain rather than a support. The counselor said that it was normal to feel that way, but normal didn't make it any easier. I was at a crossroads, and both paths seemed to demand a sacrifice I wasn't prepared to make. Either I fight for my autonomy and risk losing Emily, or I continue down this path, hoping things will get better without losing myself completely. Every time I tried to bring this up with Emily, the conversation would veer off or get sidetracked by daily life's demands. Bills to pay, groceries to buy, planning for the future. All of it felt like background noise that drowned out our real issues. It was like being on a treadmill with no way to get off. I kept thinking back to our early days, the spontaneity, the unspoken understanding. Was it possible to get that back, or was it just a romanticized memory? I didn't have the answers, and that terrified me. How do you decide between the life you've built and the person you've become? How do you reconcile the person you are with the person you thought you'd be? As I sat there, mulling over these questions, a sense of urgency pressed down on me. I knew I couldn't keep ignoring this, couldn't keep hoping it would resolve itself. Something had to change, but what? And how? The uncertainty was suffocating, and I wondered if anyone else had ever felt this trapped in their own life choices. I sat on the couch, staring at the muted TV, while Emily bustled around the kitchen. Her mother, Eileen, was a frequent topic of our arguments. Emily always seemed to have a reason, an excuse, or some convoluted logic to justify her mom's antics. Today was no different. "I think she just wants to help," Emily said, her voice floating over the clinking of dishes. She'd been on about Eileen again, something about how she only meddled because she cared. I didn't buy it. "Help?" I shot back. "She's not helping when she criticizes every decision we make, Em. Every single one." Emily sighed, a familiar sound that signaled the beginning of another round of debates. "She doesn't mean it like that. She grew up differently, you know?" I knew the drill. Eileen had a rough childhood, which Emily believed excused the constant interference. It was as if every unsolicited opinion or unwanted advice was a debt we had to pay back in understanding and patience. "But it's too much," I insisted, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "It's like she's living our life for us." Emily emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked at me with those earnest eyes that always seemed so sure of her mother's intentions. "She's just being protective. She wants what's best for us." "Does she?" I challenged, feeling the familiar heat rising in my chest. "Or is she just trying to control everything?" Just then, Emily's phone buzzed on the countertop. She glanced at it, and then back at me, as if the interruption was some cosmic sign to bolster her defense. "See?" she said, holding the phone up. "She's just checking in." I gestured for her to read it. Emily sighed again, this time with a touch of exasperation, and opened the message. As her eyes scanned the screen, I wondered what excuse she'd come up with next. "She says we should consider moving closer to her." Emily read aloud, pausing to let the suggestion hang in the air. "That it'd be easier for us. For when we start a family." "Easier for who?" I asked, unable to hide my irritation. "For her." Emily shrugged, as if the weight of the world wasn't on her shoulders. But I could see it in the crease of her brow, the way her fingers fidgeted with the phone case. She was torn, defending her mother while trying to maintain our boundaries. "David, she just wants to help. Maybe she's right. It could be easier," she said, softer now, as though the volume of her voice could somehow soften the reality. I felt a pang of desperation. Easier for her to drop by unannounced. Easier for her to make decisions for us. "That's what this really is, Emily." She didn't respond immediately, just stared at the text like it held all the answers we'd been searching for. But I knew better. This was just another step in Eileen's constant dance of interference, her ability to weave herself into every crevice of our lives. Emily's phone buzzed again. Another message from Eileen, this time something about which school district would be best for our non-existent kids. The grip of control was tightening, and Emily seemed to be caught in the middle, unable or unwilling to break free. I leaned back, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. This was our life now, a series of justifications, a constant balancing act between what we wanted and what Eileen thought we needed. "Do you ever think about what we want?" I asked quietly, watching her face for any sign of realization. She hesitated, and in that pause, I saw the struggle. The battle between loyalty to her mother and the life we were trying to build together. It was a fleeting moment, but it was there. A crack in the foundation, and I wondered how long we could keep patching it up before everything crumbled. Or was this just the start of the real problem? I was in the living room that Saturday morning, savoring the rare quiet when I heard the unmistakable sound of keys jangling outside the front door. Emily was in the shower, oblivious to the impending invasion. Before I could react, the door swung open, and there she was, my Mary, standing as if she owned the place. "Hello, dear," she chirped, stepping in with a basket of who knows what. I forced a smile, trying to mask my irritation. We'd talked about boundaries several times, but here she was, ignoring them as always. "I wasn't expecting you," I said, aiming for casual, but landing closer to exasperated. "Emily's in the shower." "Oh, that's fine," Mary replied, waving her hand dismissively. "I just brought over some things I thought you might need." She started unpacking the basket, placing items on the coffee table. It was a mix of canned goods, some questionable fruit, and a stack of magazines older than our relationship. I felt my space shrinking, my patience thinning. "Mary, we really need to talk about these visits," I began, trying to sound firm yet respectful. "It's just that we—" "Did you see the new decor in my guest room?" she interrupted, as if my words were just background noise. "I thought you'd like that vase I borrowed last month. It's from your wedding, you know." My mind flashed back to the missing vase. I had thought I misplaced it, tearing through the house looking for it before reluctantly accepting it was gone. Now, the realization hit me. She'd taken it. Without a word. I felt a heat rising in me, a mix of anger and helplessness. "Mary, you can't just take things from our home," I said, more forcefully than I intended. "And you can't just show up unannounced." Mary looked taken aback, as if she'd never considered that she might be overstepping. "I was only trying to help," she insisted, her tone defensive now. "You know I just want the best for you too." But her version of best came at the expense of our privacy, our independence. I glanced at the magazines, knowing I'd have to find a polite way to dispose of them without her noticing next time. The mental exhaustion of managing her expectations was beginning to weigh on me. Emily emerged from the hallway, her hair wrapped in a towel. The look on her face shifted from surprise to an almost apologetic resignation. She knew, as I did, that this was a conversation long overdue. "Mom, we need to set some boundaries," Emily said, echoing my earlier sentiment, but with a gentler touch. I appreciated her support, even if it was a little late. "We love you, but we need our space." Mary's face fell, and for a moment, I saw the woman who just wanted to be close to her daughter. But the cost was too high. Our home wasn't a revolving door. "Well, if that's how you feel," Mary huffed, her voice a mix of hurt and defiance. She gathered her things and left without another word, leaving a silence that felt both heavy and liberating. Emily turned to me, eyes wary. "Are you okay?" she asked, reaching for my hand. "Yeah," I sighed, squeezing her hand. "But we need to make sure this sticks. I can't keep doing this." Emily nodded, and though we both knew it wouldn't be the last we'd see of her mom, there was a shared determination to make it work. But as I looked around the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that every corner held something else that might disappear without notice. Just like the vase. Would this be the new normal, a life of constant vigilance? What would you do if your boundaries were crossed like this? We had to figure it out, and fast, or risk losing the sanctuary of our own home. The kitchen was my refuge, a place where I could clear my head and stir up some clarity. As I chopped vegetables, the rhythmic thud of the knife seemed to match the frantic beating of my heart. I had to talk to Emily, convince her that it was time to set some firm boundaries with her mom, no matter how uncomfortable it made us. Emily was sitting across the counter, fiddling with her phone, eyes darting between me and the screen. She looked exhausted, the kind of tired that sleep wouldn't fix. I placed the knife down and took a deep breath. We can't keep letting her bulldoze us," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This has to be it." Before Emily could respond, her phone rang with a sharp trill. It was her mom, and the tension in the room cranked up a notch. Emily hesitated, then answered, putting the call on speaker. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice strained. The voice on the other end was loud and angry, words tumbling out like a river breaking a dam. "Emily, you need to stop this nonsense. I am your mother, and you will come here this weekend. No excuses." The threat was thinly veiled, and it hung in the air, waiting to be acknowledged. Emily's eyes flickered to mine, searching for guidance. I nodded, subtly urging her to stand her ground. "Mom," Emily said, her voice wavering. "I can't come this weekend. We've talked about this." The response was immediate and vicious. "You ungrateful little brat. After everything I've done for you." The words echoed in the kitchen, sharp like broken glass. Emily flinched, and I could see her resolve wavering. My heart ached for her, but I knew we had to push through. Suddenly, Emily's phone buzzed again, this time with a text. She glanced at it, her face paling. She turned the screen toward me. It was a message from her mom, and it wasn't just aimed at Emily. "You think you can hide behind him? I'll make sure he knows exactly what it means to cross me." A chill ran down my spine. The threat had shifted from implicit to explicit, and now it was directed at me. My mind raced with possibilities, each darker than the last. What would you do if you found yourself in our shoes, staring down the barrel of someone else's vendetta? I swallowed hard, trying to maintain my composure. "Emily, this is serious. We need to be careful," I said, my voice hushed. "These aren't just empty words anymore." Emily nodded, her eyes wide with fear and understanding. The sound of her mom still ranting on the phone was a distant roar now, a storm we were on the outskirts of and desperately trying to avoid. I reached out and ended the call. The silence that followed was almost deafening. We both sat there, the kitchen suddenly feeling less like a safe haven and more like a battlefield. The realization hit me hard. This wasn't just about Emily's relationship with her mom anymore. It was about us, our safety, our peace. We had to act, and fast, before things spiraled even further out of control. Was I about to make it worse? I logged into our online banking, my heart thudding like a drum. I had to get a grip on our finances after everything that had happened. Emily had been avoiding this discussion for weeks, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. The login screen flashed up, and I typed in our details, the keyboard clicking under my fingers, a sharp reminder of reality. As the account overview loaded, I felt Emily's eyes on my back. She was quiet, too quiet, and it only heightened my anxiety. "I've just been a bit busy," she had said, but I needed to see for myself. I clicked on the transaction history, scrolling through what I hoped would be just mundane expenses. At first, everything seemed normal. Grocery stores, utility bills, a few online purchases. But then I noticed a recurring transfer. Same amount, same recipient, every month. My heart skipped a beat, and I clicked on the details. The money was going to Emily's mother. It was a significant sum, enough to make a dent in our savings each time. I turned to Emily, my voice low but firm. "Emily, why are we sending money to your mom every month?" Her face went pale, her eyes darting away from mine. "It's just to help her out a bit," she mumbled, but her words felt like a thin veil over something deeper. "Help her out," I echoed, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's a lot of money, Em. We need to talk about this." She fidgeted, her fingers twisting together. "She needs it more than we do," she finally said, a hint of defensiveness creeping in. But as I looked back at the screen, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just Emily trying to help her mom. It felt like control, like her mom had her hooks in us financially. I remembered the phone call, her mom's voice laced with demands, and suddenly it all made sense. "Emily, this can't go on. We're not an ATM for your mom." I pressed, my frustration bubbling up. The fear in her eyes was palpable, and I realized she was trapped in a web woven long before we were together. "I didn't know how to tell you," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. She's been asking for it." I rubbed my temples, the weight of this new revelation settling heavily on my shoulders. This wasn't just about money. It was about control, manipulation. Emily's mom had a hold over her, over us, and it was time to break free. I took a deep breath, firming my resolve. "We need to set boundaries, Em. This isn't sustainable." She nodded slowly, tears brimming in her eyes. "I know. I didn't want to disappoint her. But what about us?" I asked softly. "We can't keep living like this." Emily's silence was answer enough. She was torn, and it was up to us to find a way out. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll figure this out together, okay?" She nodded again, a small glimmer of hope in her eyes. We were at a crossroads, and I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But it was a path we had to take if we wanted to reclaim our lives, to find peace in the chaos. As I logged out of the banking app, I glanced at Emily, a silent promise passing between us. We would face this storm together, but it was time to take the wheel and steer our own course. What would you do if you were in our shoes? That night, as we lay in our dimly lit bedroom, I knew it was time to address the elephant in the room. I turned to Emily, my heart pounding in my chest. Em, we need to talk about this pattern. It's not just about the finances. She looked at me, her eyes wide and a bit apprehensive. What do you mean? She asked, shifting slightly under the covers. It was as if she knew where this conversation was heading, but was still hoping to avoid it. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. It's about how we handle things. How we let things slide until they become a mountain. It's not just you, it's me too. But it feels like there's this hiding going on. She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the bedspread. I'm not hiding anything, she murmured, but her voice lacked conviction. I wanted to believe her, but deep down, I sensed there was more. I pushed myself up, sitting against the headboard. Emily, I found something when I was cleaning out the closet. A box. I didn't open it, but it was tucked away like it was meant to be forgotten. Her face went pale, and she sat up abruptly. A box? She echoed, her voice barely a whisper. There was a flicker of something in her eyes. Fear, maybe, or regret. Yeah, a box. I confirmed, trying to keep my tone gentle. It seemed important, and I thought we should look at it together. She swallowed hard, nodding slowly. Okay, she said, her voice small. Let's look at it. I reached over to the closet, pulling out the nondescript cardboard box. Emily watched me, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. As I placed the box between us, she let out a shaky breath. Carefully, I lifted the lid, revealing a collection of items that seemed to span decades. I noticed a small teddy bear, its fur worn with age, and a stack of old letters tied with a faded ribbon. There was a photo album, its edges frayed, and a few trinkets that must have held some personal significance. Emily reached for the teddy bear, holding it tenderly in her hands. This was mine, she said softly, her voice laced with nostalgia. I had it since I was a kid. I nodded, understanding now that this box was more than just clutter. It was a time capsule of her life, a hidden cache of memories. Why hide it? I asked gently, searching her eyes for answers. She shrugged, her gaze averted. I don't know. It just felt easier to keep some things out of sight, out of mind. Like how my mom did with her stuff. There it was, the connection to her mother, the behavior pattern repeating itself. I realized that Emily was echoing her mother's ways, avoiding confrontation by burying the past. It was a revelation that hit me hard. Emily, we don't have to hide things anymore, I said, reaching for her hand again. We can face them together, piece by piece. Just because your mom did it this way doesn't mean you have to. She looked up at me, and I saw tears glistening in her eyes. I know, she whispered, squeezing my hand. I want to do better. For us, for our future. We can start now, I said, feeling a renewed sense of hope. It won't be easy, but we're not alone in this. We have each other. As she leaned into me, the weight of the past seemed to lighten just a little. It wasn't gone, but it was no longer hidden. We sat there, the box between us, united in our resolve to break free from the patterns that had held us captive for too long. What would you do if you had to confront the past to reclaim your future? It was a question that I knew we'd be answering together, one day at a time. The therapist's office had a strange calm to it, like the air before a storm. Emily and I sat on the couch, the cushions far too soft to feel comfortable. Dr. H was across from us, clipboard in hand, ready to dissect the mess we'd made of our marriage. The room smelled faintly of lavender, probably from one of those plug-in things. Emily looked at me, her eyes a mixture of hope and fear. I want us to work, she said, echoing what she'd promised just days earlier. Her voice cracked a little, betraying the doubt she carried. Dr. H nodded, glancing between us. It's a good start, she said. But we need to address the underlying issues. Communication, trust, those don't fix themselves. Just as I opened my mouth to agree, the door creaked open. My MIL, Eileen, made her entrance. She'd insisted on being part of this session, claiming she wanted to help. I wasn't convinced. Her presence was like a dark cloud settling over the room. Eileen wasted no time. I'm here to support Emily, she said, taking a seat with all the grace of a cat ready to pounce. I think it's important for her to have someone in her corner. Dr. H raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. I felt the tension coil in my stomach. Emily was caught between us, Her loyalty stretched to its breaking point. "We need to talk about respect," Eileen declared, her eyes fixed on me. "Emily deserves to be treated right. And frankly, I've seen you fall short." I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my cool. It wasn't the first time she'd accused me of not being good enough for her daughter. But this time, she went further. "You've been abusive, haven't you?" Eileen's words hit like a slap. I could see Emily flinch, caught off guard by the sudden escalation. "That's not true," I said, my voice barely steady. "I've never laid a hand on her." Eileen scoffed. "Abuse isn't just physical. It's words, it's control. I've seen how you speak to her." Dr. H held up a hand, a referee in this verbal sparring. "These are serious accusations. We need to address them carefully." I felt the ground slipping beneath me. Every word felt like a misstep on thin ice. "Emily, you know that's not true," I pleaded, searching her face for reassurance. But Emily's eyes were clouded with uncertainty. I don't know," she whispered. "Sometimes I feel like I can't breathe." The words cut deep. Maybe I hadn't been the husband I thought I was. Maybe Eileen was right, and I was blind to my own faults. The risk of losing Emily, of losing everything, loomed over me like a specter. Dr. H spoke again, her voice firm. "We can work through this, but both of you need to be honest. We need truth, not accusations." Eileen crossed her arms, smug in her self-righteousness. I felt cornered, but I wasn't about to give up. "Not on Emily, not on us." "Emily," I said, turning to her. "I want to change. Tell me how I can be better. I need to hear it from you." Emily hesitated, her gaze flickering between me and her mother. The silence stretched, taut with potential. Dr. H leaned in slightly, breaking the pause. "This is a chance for a new beginning, but you have to take it together." I reached for Emily's hand, my own shaking slightly. "I won't let us slip away," I promised, hoping it was enough. Emily squeezed my hand back, a small gesture that felt monumental. Eileen's presence was still a shadow, but for a moment, it felt like we were stepping into the light, together. "What would you have done in my place?" David's study was dimly lit, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the cluttered desk. The room was my sanctuary, filled with books and mementos that had once comforted me. Now, it was the backdrop for the most difficult decision I had to make. The air felt heavy, my mind a battlefield between the expectations of my Eileen, and the promises I made to Emily. Emily sat across from me, her eyes searching mine for something I wasn't sure I could give. "We need to decide," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. It was clear she was torn, caught between her mother's demands and our fragile marriage. Eileen had been relentless, her opinions woven into every conversation we had. She believed she knew what was best for us, and her influence on Emily was undeniable. "You have to do what's right for your future," she had said, her words echoing in my mind like a mantra I wished I could forget. But what about my future? Our future? I had to remind myself that without a firm stance, nothing would change. I looked at Emily, trying to gauge her thoughts. "What do you want, Em? Not what your mom thinks, not what I think. What do you want?" She hesitated, the weight of the question hanging between us. "I want us to be happy, to move forward without all this tension," she finally replied, her voice tinged with sadness. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the tug-of-war between her loyalty to her mother and her love for me. I knew it was time for a decision, time to step into the role I'd been avoiding. "If things are going to work, we need to set boundaries," I said, the words surprising even me with their firmness. "I can't keep living in the shadow of your mom's expectations." Emily looked down, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. "Do you really think that's possible? She's always been such a big part of my life." I leaned forward, desperate for her to understand. "I know, but we need to prioritize us. I'm not saying to cut ties, but we can't let her dictate our marriage. We need to be a team." The silence was punctuated by the distant ticking of the grandfather clock, each tick a reminder that time was slipping away. Emily finally nodded, a slow, deliberate movement that felt like a crack in the wall that had built up between us. "Okay," she said, her voice firmer now. "Let's do it. Together." I felt a small wave of relief wash over me, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. The confrontation would be inevitable, an open conversation with Eileen about our boundaries. Or, if it came to it, a separation from the toxic influence she held over us. The decision was made, but the path ahead was still uncertain. I looked around my study, the familiar surroundings grounding me. I knew that whatever happened next, it would require strength and unity. "We'll talk to her," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We'll explain what we need, and if she can't accept it, then we'll deal with that when it comes." Emily reached across the desk, her fingers finding mine. Her touch was warm, a reminder of the connection we were fighting to preserve. "We'll find a way," she murmured, her eyes meeting mine with renewed determination. In that moment, I felt a flicker of hope. The battle wasn't over, but at least we were ready to face it together. What would you do if you were standing at this crossroads, knowing that the next step could change everything? After months of distancing myself from Emily, I realized it was necessary due to her mother's overwhelming control. Every time I thought Emily might recognize her mother's manipulation, Eileen would create another crisis, pulling her back into her grasp. I spent sleepless nights hoping Emily would stand up for herself, but I had to accept that she wasn't ready to break free. One night, while waiting for a text from Emily that never came, I understood that I was waiting for someone who wouldn't choose me. The next day, I called her and arranged to meet at our favorite cafe. I expressed my feelings about her mother's interference and how it drained me. Emily admitted she didn't know how to change the situation, and I suggested we needed space. It was painful, but I knew it was necessary for both of us. In the weeks that followed, I focused on myself, reconnecting with friends and rediscovering my hobbies. I often thought of Emily and hoped she would eventually find the strength to set boundaries with her mother. For now, I was learning to let go, knowing I had made the right choice to prioritize my own well-being.